We'll start the video. All right, well, hello and welcome to class. So we are here in week 3. Can you believe we've made it 3 weeks? I want to talk a little bit about the discussion and talk a little bit about how week 2 went. So I'll go ahead and stop the video. I'll share our screen and let's talk about week 2 real quick. So how was the overall feeling of the way week 2 went? Were you guys pleased with the grades? I know some of you kind of struggled on some things, just really minor things though. So what was the overall consensus? Terry, how'd you feel it went during week 2 for you? I know the discussion, good, I'm glad. So I know the discussion in week 2, you had to post a before and an after. It was a peer review. And some of you did very, very well. And I appreciate you reading the instructions and doing the before and the after. We have another chance for those of you who didn't do so well in discussion 2 to do a little bit better in discussion 3. We're going to have another peer review of invitations. So the grand opening invitations that you were designing in week 2, you're going to be posting them. Post a JPEG or a PNG of your invitation from your assignment 2. And I want you to explain why you made the design decisions that you did. And go into detail, okay? I don't want one-liners that you're going to be graded on the length of your post. So ask for any specific input that you'd like to receive. Maybe if you have a question you could ask, or maybe if you want to achieve a certain look or use a certain tool but you're not sure how to do it, ask the question. So once your post is complete, give suggestions and comments for other people's work. You do need to reply to at least 2 other peers, okay? That's minimum. And feel free to reply to others as well. So I want you to also consider the feedback that you get from me and also the students who give some feedback. Now, mostly, and I had one student say, well, nobody commented on my assignment. So what do? You always have my grading feedback I guess, to fall back on. So either way, you should be applying the changes that I give you. But if your peers happen to suggest something else that you think would be a good change, then I highly recommend that. But you will be graded on whether or not you posted a before and after. So please note that an image of the revision needs to be posted for full credit. A lot of students lost credit because they didn't post the after. And that's the whole point of this, right? You want to see how you taking the feedback and how it looks after you've applied it. So there's lots of instructions on discussion 3 on how to post your JPEG and what's expected. And I'm already in there, so everything's live now. We've already seeing some students posting some things. So this is great. So get in there, get active, make sure your initial post is done by Wednesday to also get full credit. And then don't be late on the discussions. This is how I take attendance in class. So stay active and participate. Plus, it's a lot of fun to kind of see what other people are doing. And it helps me, I don't know about you, it kind of helps me to kind of gauge where I'm at with other students' designs and kind of feed off of their creativity as well. Are there any questions about what to expect for week 3 as far as the discussion goes? All right, and then let's talk about the assignment. So we have 2 assignments coming up, and I might be doing something a little bit differently today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 19 rules of typography because you will be expected to know them and apply them to your designs. And so I'll go into a little bit of depth with this. And so there are 19 rules, so bear with me. But we're also going to do some design, heavy design today. We're going to go into InDesign. We're going to learn how to lay out an article. And that is going to be your assessment 3 tutorial demo today. And then you're also going to learn how to do a Illustrator portrait, a typographic portrait with your font that you chose. Now the font that you chose to write on during week 2 will be the font that you'll be using for this portrait, okay? And it has to be used off of the approved list that you've been given to the downloaded link that was provided to you in week 1. So are there any questions about where to find that, how to get that? Everyone's aware. All right, so without further ado, we're just going to keep the housekeeping to a minimum, but I did want to start into week 3. We're going to be talking about setting type. We're going to be talking about the 19 rules of typography. So why is it so important? Why is typography so important when it comes to a designer's main goals? I think it's just the fact that they have to be able to read it, right? Legibility is the type large enough and distinct enough that the reader can discriminate individual words and letters. And readability, it's kind of asking the question, does the quality of the page make it easy to read? Is this something that you would want to continue to read just based off of the look alone? So think about that in terms of your grand opening invitation this week, and then also the article that you lay out. Is it inviting? Is it pleasurable to the eye? Think about some magazine. Have you read a magazine recently? And what magazine was that? And what was it that drew you to read it? I mean, was it a particular article? Was it a picture? Most oftentimes it's a visual element that will grab you. So this is a pretty important goal that we have to have. And it's just, how do I make something boring very interesting? And that's how we do it visually. We want to make it aesthetically pleasing. All right, so we're going to try to go through this pretty quickly, but let's talk about the 19 rules of typography. Now, no matter where you go or what you do, as a designer, these 19 rules are pretty fixed and they stay pretty universal throughout the industry. So rule 1, we'll be talking about all these different rules, but rule 1, let me zoom in so you can see it. There we go. Rule 1, so for optimum legibility, we just talked about that. Choose classic, time-tested typefaces. Now, in your case, we've kind of made your job easy. We've given you a list of approved fonts, so you don't have to kind of stress over, well, is this going to be good? Is this a classic font? What's a classic font? We've kind of given you a list that you can choose from. So the approved list is pick a font off of that, and there are plenty to choose from. Whether you're a serif or a sans serif kind of person, there's a lot to choose from. They are classic, they are time-tested typefaces, and they have been used several times throughout history, you could say. So make sure, some of them that come to mind are Helvetica, Futura, Baskerville. There's some other examples down here. Times New Roman, obviously. So lots of other fonts too. If you're not familiar with them, I suggest maybe play around with them and see what you think. But again, we want to make sure that we're using classic typefaces. No curly, swirly, cursive-looking, frilly-looking fonts. Those aren't time-tested. Those are not classical fonts. Those are actually very hard to read and goes against the rule of legibility. So stay away from that. I know it's tempting to do when you're trying to design for a certain company, but stick with the clean classic fonts, okay? This also helps craft, I guess, consistency among the characters, and this allows you to exhibit highly legible proportions. All right, rule number 2. So use maximum 2 types of typefaces. You were given this rule to use during week 2 with your grand opening invitation. We wanted to see you incorporate at least 2, but we're saying maximum 2. Don't use any more than that. Be mindful not to use too many different typefaces at one time. And that's why this rule stands, because it's pretty easy to say, oh, I can use this font, this font, this font, this font, and it looks really fun. But if you look at the example at the top here, Abraham Lincoln quotes, and then it has a quote, and then at the bottom it has the byline. And there's a lot going on, and even the fun fonts, you could say, it just makes it really hard to read, and it looks kind of a hodgepodge mess. But at the example at the bottom with the check mark, this Abraham Lincoln quote stands out very well. The clean, classic sans serif font against a serif font really helps draw me in, and it doesn't overwhelm my eyes. And even the Abraham Lincoln here is italicized, but it's still that same sans serif font that was used at the top. So really, we're only using 2 fonts, but you can alternate in font styles. Are there any questions with rule 2? And I suppose rule 1. We good? Okay, so taking the same example, let's look at rule 3. Avoid combining typefaces that are too similar in appearance. So here's where rule number 2 is important, because if you're using typefaces, if you're using two sans serif typefaces, then you're not going to have any contrast and nothing's really going to stand out. It's going to kind of look boring and blah, pretty beige all over. But the example here at the bottom uses two contrasting typefaces, a serif and a sans serif. And because of that, that contrast really works. It helps to set, it helps the eye to kind of gauge what's being set apart. And I guess there's some division there, some important separation that needs to be there to help elements stand out and kind of stand on their own. So again, it's important to avoid the ambiguity caused by combining types that are too similar in appearance. So like avoid using Times Roman with Platino together. Any two serif fonts shouldn't be together, and any two sans serif fonts should not be together. You kind of want a serif font and a sans serif font to kind of offset each other. So that's the general rule of thumb with Rule 3. Now with Rule 4, we're going to be using upper and lowercase letters. Okay, so again, we're trying to incorporate that element of contrast. Text set in all capital letters severely retards reading. So I only recommend doing it maybe for a short phrase or a headline. But if you're laying out an article, a body of text, or reading a book, have you ever, are you in the middle of a book or a magazine right now? Or any of you? Okay, so Terry, what is the body of the chapter or the article that you're reading? Do they use all caps or lowercase letters? Lowercase, right? And so no matter what you're reading, whether it's an article or a chapter in a book or a magazine or whatever it happens to be, even a pamphlet, whatever you've picked up or whatever you're reading, you'll notice that heavy blocks of text, like bodies of text or a chapter of text, they always use the lowercase, right? Because it's easier to read. I don't think you'll ever see all caps, a whole body of text in all caps. It just would be too hard to read, and that read wouldn't be a very good one anyway. So as you can see in this example at the top, it's very hard for your eyes to kind of follow along. Lowercase in big blocks of text is very appropriate, and so I highly recommend that we do this. The ascender and descenders provide the necessary visual cues to make text more readable. It kind of guides the eye, which is why we like the ascender and descenders of lowercase text. Whereas when everything's set in all caps, it just all kind of, it's all monotonous. It's just a really rectangular shape, and it doesn't really guide the eye, so it does not read well. So that is Rule 4, avoid that. Rule 5, so use an average point size for text type. This will apply to your assessment 3 when you have to lay out your article. You're going to want to pick an appropriate font size. For text type, use sizes that, according to legibility studies, prove most readable. And here we have a list here. For text type, you want to use sizes that, let's see, the sizes generally range from 8 to 12 points for text. And that's read from an average distance of 12 to 14 inches. So if you're reading a book or an article, you can kind of get away with about 8-point font, maybe 9-point font. If you're going to put it on, I don't know, like something that would be like a poster, you probably want to up it to 12 points, 12 to 14 inches. If you're doing something that's going to be seen at a distance, you definitely want to up the font size. But for a book or a magazine, I'd say you'd be pretty good between the 8 and the 9-point font there. So for your article text, you definitely want to try to use like an 8 or 9 font. Okay, so Rule 6, use minimum type sizes and weights. So basically here, avoid using too many different type sizes and weights at the same time. All right, it kind of goes without saying, if you look at the examples, you're using a heavy bold with a regular, it just doesn't display well. Some experts recommend using no more than 2 sizes, one for display titles and then one for text type. So in this case, we just want to make sure we just stick with 1. I guess maximum would be 2. And then we're kind of blowing through these, which is good. Rule 7, what you want to do is use text types of book weight. So again, for your article that you'll be laying out, you want to use text types of book weight, and what that means is avoid typefaces appearing too heavy or too light. Sometimes within a font family, you'll see that a font has a light version or an ultra light that proves to be too hard to read when it's printed. And so even on the screen, it's kind of hard to read. So use a regular font weight. The text typefaces that are too light cannot easily be distinguished from their backgrounds. And so in typefaces that are too heavy, counterforms kind of diminish in size. So it does make them less legible. So kind of stick with a book or a regular within your font style. Now, are there any questions so far about rules 1 through 7? It's pretty straightforward, right? There is a lot to remember, but a lot of it is common sense. Like with rule 8, use typefaces of medium width. So it's the width of the font, and this is just because it reads better. Avoid typefaces that appear extremely wide or narrow in width. You don't want something too narrow, and you don't want something too stretched out. So just rather than distorting text by stretching or squeezing the text width, you want to use type families that include condensed and extended faces that kind of fall within the accepted proportional normals. So you don't have to worry about this so much because we've given you an approved font list, but just be aware that you might want to kind of hone in on this a little bit on this rule. Times New Roman is an excellent font to use for bodies of text like your article. So that would be a good font to use. All right, rule 9. So you want to use consistent letter and word spacing. Simply put, for text type, you want to use the consistent letter and word spacing to produce an even, uninterrupted texture. Now, if you'll look at the example at the top, what do you see about the top? What visual difference do you see between these two examples? The spaces, exactly. So it's kind of easy to see right off the bat that the top example has all these little gaps, these uneven spacing between the letters, and the gaps are uneven. And so it makes a really choppy block of text. Whereas the example on the bottom, the spaces are even and they increase proportionally as the letter spacing increases. So everything is even and consistent, and there's no, and it feels uniform and it flows. So rather than the example at the top, we want to be aware of our spacing. So if you see this using a certain alignment, it's time to choose a different alignment, okay? So we want something to look more like the example on the bottom. All right, so with rule 10, you want to use appropriate line lengths. Lines that are too short or maybe too long, they disrupt the reading process. And this is often seen with descenders or ascenders that are a little too tall or too low. So as the eye travels along overly long lines, negotiating the next line becomes very difficult. So reading overly short lines also creates choppy eye movements that kind of make you tired and can get really annoying as the reader. So when working with text type, a maximum of about 70 characters, that's about 10 to 12 words per line, is thought to be the most acceptable. So just be aware of your spacing and make sure that everything kind of looks aligned correctly. And does that make sense? Or is there any questions about Rule 10? All right, we are blowing through this, so that's good news. Let's talk about Rule 11. So for text type, I want you to use line spacing that easily carries the eye from one line to the next. What does that mean? Well, lines of type with too little space between them really slow down the reading process. And the eye is kind of forced to take in several lines at once. So if you look at the example at the top, what needs to be adjusted to make this have a little bit more breathing room? What would you need to adjust at the top example? Any suggestions? The leading, exactly. So the leading is the space between the lines of text. And so right now, the top example is a really tight leading, and the A centers and D centers are running into each other, and it's very hard to read. The eye is overwhelmed, and you take in too much at a time. Whereas the example at the bottom has really good leading spacing, and so there's some breathing room between the lines, and it allows the text to flow a lot easier. It doesn't overwhelm your eyes as the reader. So by adding 1 to 4 points of space between lines of type, really depending on the specific typeface, because they're all different, but the readability can be improved. And so pay attention to your leading. I don't want letters running into each other. You really want a good space. Now, I say about your leading should be about 2 points different than your font size. So it should be 2 points higher than your font size. So if you're using a font size of 8, you want your leading to be at least 10 points. Okay, so that's usually the good rule of thumb. It's about a 2-point difference between the font size and the leading. All right, let's look at rule 12. So you want to use a flush left type of alignment. And this goes to say, especially for your article layout, if you're going to do a pull quote, this is an example of a pull quote. And so for optimum readability, you want to use the flush left, ragged right type alignment. So what does that mean? Well, that means if you can see in this example here on the bottom, if I were to have a ruler go vertically down from this block of text, it would line up perfectly, right? But on the right-hand side, it is ragged, meaning it's not a perfect alignment. But that's okay because we read from left to right. So as long as everything is lined up on the left side, it doesn't really matter how it ends on the right. So we want a flush left, ragged right type of alignment, especially when you're laying out your article that you wrote on your font size. So for assessment 3, you will be graded on the type of alignment that you choose. And this is the one that I hope you go with. As you can see in the example above, it makes it really hard to read, but not even that, maybe it's not very aesthetically pleasing. It looks kind of out of order, unorganized, a little chaotic. So we need more alignment. We need more organization so that the eye can read the quote a little easier. All right, and then rule 13, create effective rags. What I want you to do is strive for a consistent rhythmic rags. What does that mean? The purpose of effective rags is not only to achieve an aesthetic beauty, but to enable readers to kind of move gently. And that just means no abrupt gaps or stops at the end of your block of text. Now you can achieve this by turning off your hyphenate box in InDesign, and I'll show you how to do that because you'll also be graded on that. That will help offset any weird cutoffs on words, but also it will help it wrap around nicely. So most default settings in your InDesign will allow you to have a consistent, effective rag at the end of your sentences. But if you're seeing some big gaps, you might want to manually go in and adjust. But usually the default settings kind of handle that pretty well. Just be aware, okay? All right, and then number 14, this is rule 14. So you clearly want to indicate paragraphs. All right, this is a big problem usually in assessment 3 that I've seen in the past. Clearly indicate paragraphs, but really be careful not to upset the integrity and the visual consistency of the text. And we'll touch on this a little bit in our demo, because after this I'll go in and show you how I want things to be laid out. But as you can see in the example at the top, it's not very clearly indicated where the gap stops. And so right here, even, it looks like they've kind of shortened this paragraph down here. So we want to make sure that the 2 most common ways of indicating paragraphs are by either indenting them and inserting additional space between the paragraphs, or it's kind of one or the other. It's not both. And this does kind of a poor job of indicating that. But you'll often use a drop cap, or you might indent the first word of the paragraph, or you will put a break in between the paragraphs. That's usually the most common that you'll see. Okay. So I've talked a lot about avoiding widows and orphans in your articles, and that hasn't really applied to us until now because we're going to be laying out a big block of text, which is our article. Lots of text going on, and it's really easy to have those orphans and widows. Now, do you know what an orphan and a widow is? Okay, so a widow is a word or a very short line at either the beginning or the end of a paragraph, meaning if it's one or two words at the end of a paragraph, we usually call that a widow, kind of like this example here at the top where paragraph, that's the last word in the sentence, is hanging at the bottom. So this is a widow, okay? Now, if an orphan is a single syllable at the end of a paragraph, so similar concept. We want at least 2 or 3 words here at the bottom of a paragraph for it to feel like it's not a widow or just hanging out by itself. We don't want the words to be lonely. We want them to have company. So we really want to, whoops. I think we were just right there. Okay. So we really want to be careful with that. Okay. So just avoid widows and orphans whenever possible. This example here at the bottom is a good example because at the bottom there's at least 6 words here hanging out, and so they're not lonely, they're a good group, and that's acceptable. Okay, and then rule 16 just simply says emphasize elements within the text. Okay, when you're working with big bodies of text, things can kind of just look blah and run together. And so what you want is to make things stand out, especially in article layout and design. If you were designing for a magazine company, or even if you were reading a magazine, have you noticed there's elements that kind of stand out? There's images that go with the article, there's pull quotes, there's little fact boxes, there's usually a box that kind of is pulled out, or graph, or something interesting to look at just other than text. Well, when you're working with large bodies of text, you also want to make sure that you emphasize certain elements within the text, because a large column of text, nothing really stands out. So with discretion and without disturbing the flow of the reading, you could use italics or maybe underline your type, or maybe use a different color to highlight something, or use a bold type within a light type to kind of create some contrast and emphasis to a certain particular section that you're wanting to highlight. So use minimum means for maximum results, meaning you don't have to do a whole lot, but it is important to kind of make that distinction. All right, and then I think that was it on this one. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Now, rule 17, always maintain the integrity of type. What does that mean? Just don't distort it. Don't distort the type. Always keep the integrity of it. There's a way to resize in Illustrator and InDesign, and lucky for you, it's the same. Hold down Shift and click and drag the corner anchor point of your box, whether it's a shape or a picture or a text box, it's all the same. And that will constrain your proportions. So when you're resizing your type or your text, nothing will get distorted or stretched or squished. So you just really want to avoid arbitrarily stretching letters. That's the idea here. It doesn't look professional. It's hard to read. It looks like it just went through a trash compactor. We just don't like that. And again, it looks really amateurish. So let's avoid that if we can. That's an easy one to follow. All right, so rule 18. Now we're going to be getting into alignment, which will get us into a demo that we're going to be doing. Rule 18 talks about aligning letters and words on the baseline. So I have a whole demo set up for this, so I'll explain a little bit more in detail when we get into InDesign, but let's talk about what this means. So always align letters and words on the baseline, meaning don't let some words or letters kind of hang lower than the actual baseline that you've got going. So letters are designed to kind of coexist side by side on this invisible baseline. So imagine they're sitting on this ruler. So just make sure that your letters flow. This phrase, English is not Chinese, notice how these letters are hanging lower. They're not sitting on the baseline. But in the example below, they are. So we really want to make sure that we keep everything aligned properly. Are there any questions about this? Okay, I'm sure we'll have more as we move forward with the demo, but I did want to show you that. So Rule 19, use maximum contrast between the type and the background. What does that mean? When you're working with type and color, I want you to ensure that sufficient contrast exists between type and its background. If you're using a dark background and you use a dark font on a dark background, it's going to be extremely hard to read. Same thing goes for using a very light background and a very light font color. It's going to be hard to read. So you want to add contrast, meaning if you have a light background or a white background, you really want to use a dark font. And usually on a white background, black is the ideal choice. So too little contrast in hue, saturation, or a combination of these factors can result in type that is difficult to read, maybe if not possible to read. So look at this example at the top. The contrast between the type and the background gets so light at the bottom that it's almost hard to make out the words. So be careful when you're using photos or texture behind text. That's why I say to avoid backgrounds right now on your articles. I don't want any backgrounds on your article layouts, okay? There's no need for that. We'll be going over how to create a very aesthetically pleasing layout without needing to add any busy backgrounds to our articles, okay? All right, so we made it through the 19 rules. Let's see what else I wanted to talk about. Okay, let's talk about this rule here, outline body text. Just don't ever use it. I saw a few students outline the strokes of their fonts or some words in their grand opening invitation. This is a big no-no in graphic design. It's kind of what separates us from the amateurs and the experienced professionals. You just don't outline text. It's just kind of cheapens the design. So avoid that at all costs. And I did want to put emphasis on that. Also, too many effects used on the text, like if you're blurring something or shading something, a drop shadow, blends, gradients. If you're putting too much on your text, it muddles it up. So just remember, less is more. Keep it simple. We don't really need, the most beautiful designs are the most simple, the clean looks that are contemporary and modern. Don't feel like you have to put a lot of fanfare into your design. The cleaner the look, oftentimes is the best approach. Okay, also pay attention to your text. How close is it to the edge of your page? If you're seeing your text kind of go over your margin line, then that means that you're a little too close. In the print world, if you were to send it to print, it'd get chopped right off. So it's a really good rule of thumb to kind of get in the habit of keeping your text away from the edge of the page or box, but evenly spacing it around your page, meaning you want the space on the left-hand side between the edge of your page and the text to be the same amount of space as on the right side between the edge of the page and the text. So we want even amounts of space around. Just kind of imagine a little white border around your page. We don't want text to flow into the bottom of the page too much. All right, so with layout and design, when you're working with bodies of text, punctuation is key, and it can save lives, because in this case, let's eat grandma is a phrase, but without that comma, it sounds kind of morbid. So if we added that comma after the word eat, now it's let's eat grandma, and that kind of reads a little bit differently, doesn't it? So it's the same thing with punctuation, leaving off punctuation, and not putting it in the appropriate spot. So we really want to pay attention. Now, we're not English majors, but it is important to know basic rules of grammar and to be able to include our punctuation. After all, we're in college, and so we need to make sure we are aware of these rules. And most of you are. Most of you are just fine. But this is a good example of why it's important. All right. Let's skip over this. I want to go to the 3 deadly weapons of design. These are things that you really want to avoid at all costs, even if you are forced to use them. I say avoid them. First one is stroked fonts. This is an example of a stroked font where you have your stroke and a fill on your font. There is no need for that. If you're trying to set your font apart from the background, you just need a darker font. That's all. So, or a lighter font, and depending on what color your background is. So stroked fonts are not necessary. You should avoid them at all costs. It cheapens your design. And I have been seeing this just a few times, so please be aware that you want to avoid this. Drop shadows. It's hard to see it on this example, but drop shadows really are, especially in large bodies of text, are not necessary. Again, drop shadows are only to kind of help large words, or I even say there's no need for a drop shadow, really. Again, you want to avoid drop shadows. They usually try to help bring the text off the page, but if they're not done or executed exactly right, they can really hurt your design. And so as budding designers, we really want to just avoid it altogether. And then gradients. Gradients, if used tastefully, can really be a cool look. It can add some dimension to your design, but oftentimes gradients are used inappropriately. So we just say, just avoid them. We don't need gradients. There was one point in time where gradients were out. It was so last year. It wasn't even in the graphic design industry, they kind of frowned upon. So, but now they're kind of back in, and that's okay. But when used tastefully, they're fine. But in this case, we don't need gradients, we don't need drop shadows, and we do not need stroked fonts in our article layouts. So please be aware of that. Those are things that we want to avoid. How do you use them? Well, you use them responsibly, like anything else. You want to take the time to get them right. So you don't want something too dark and you don't want something too light. You want it to be a tight drop shadow so that you don't have this big blurry shadow behind your letters. You really, if it's done correctly, can kind of heighten a headline or something. But in this case, I really don't want to focus too much on how to do them. Whoops, that's not showing. And then stroke fonts, we don't even want to learn how to do that because it's not important. we don't want to learn how to do strokes. All right, I'm going to teach you how to type on a path today. I'm going to teach you how to text warp and envelope distort, and then I'm also going to teach you how to do some vertical type. This is only to be used with skill and wisdom, but good news for you is you can apply these things to your Illustrator portrait. So have you guys looked ahead at all to see what the Illustrator portrait's all about? Okay, perfect. So our Illustrator portrait, we'll get into that in just a minute, but I did want to demo these things real quick because when I get into my Illustrator portrait, I'm going to be blowing through this really fast. So let me just stop my screen share real quick and I'll pull up my Illustrator. And if you have your Illustrator up, I would love for you to join me and practice this demo. I'll do a quick demo for you and then I'll give you time if you'd like to work alongside with me. So let me share my InDesign. So any document we'll do right now, it's just a matter of learning how to apply this. So in your type tool, you'll see the T for type tool, or you can access it. Keyboard shortcut is the letter T. So if you click on it, and you'll notice if you hold down on the type tool, you have all these hidden tools underneath. Now we won't get into what each one does today, but we will focus on the type on the path tool. And that one's really cool because no matter what you're drawing, whether it's a square or a star, or it can just be a wavy line with your pen tool, click on a few lines there. If you click on your type on a path tool, and then you'll find your path, you can automatically type text around the frame of whatever it is that you're wanting to type on. So in this case, the star, I'll get my type on a path tool and click on the path, and there you have it. Now I can type in a path. Same with this pen tool, I think, creation that I made. There it is, typing on a path. So it simply means that the text follows the path of the lines that are created. This will come in handy for our portrait, and I will show you because we'll be using our pen tool quite a bit, but this is definitely very important. So that is type on a path. Let me see what the other one was. Okay, so let's practice type on a path. I'm gonna grab my pen tool, and if you hold down the shift button, you can get some curvature to your line. If you let go of your shift tool or your shift button, I'm sorry, let me back up. As you're using the pen tool, if you click, it will just draw straight lines like this, okay? If you're holding down your pen tool, it'll allow you to create some curve. Hold down and pull that anchor. Okay, pen tool will take years to master. Maybe some of you practice more than I did, be able to get a little faster, but it's very difficult tool to get a hang of. So don't fret if you can't get it right off the bat. But it is important to practice. So I'm going to give this stroke a black stroke just so we can see it. And then I'm going to grab my type on a path tool, click on the frame. Let's see here. Right there, and there it goes. I'm going to do this one as well. Type on a path tool. And there you go. So just by using my pen tool to draw lines or curves, this allows me to fill text in. So I want to give you a minute or two to practice this, whether it's drawing a shape or using the pen tool. I encourage you to take a minute to do this in Illustrator, and then let me know and share your screen if you will. Terry, are you interested in doing that? You're going to let me know when you've done it and can share your screen. Perfect. Okay, so I'll give you a minute or two to play around with it. Let's see, and then we'll go into what text warping is. And then whenever you're ready, Terry, you just let me know. And you can also treat this just like you would a block of text, where you can go in and change the font name. And the font size can be adjusted as well. You can also change it to uppercase or lowercase. All right, Terry, you ready to share your screen? Perfect. Okay, so I'll stop share. Go ahead and hit that dual screen icon that you see. See if you can pull yours up. Terry's going to just show how she typed on a path. Perfect. So she drew the star, and it looks like you drew like an arch. That's awesome. And so you found your type on a path tool, and just like you see it here, she's able to type around the path of the shape, whether it's a arch or a shape, or whether you're using your pen tool. So excellent job. Great job, Terry. Thank you for sharing that. That is a very good job. All right, so let's jump back in Illustrator for just a second, and let's learn how to do text warping or text meshing, okay? So I'm going to take, if you'll follow along with me, we'll start from scratch. Grab your pen tool and just draw. It can be anything. It can be a curve. It can be a line. just want to give some variation to it. It does help to turn off your fill box so it doesn't show that weird coloring. And then if you want to see it clearly, I do recommend adding color to your stroke so that you can see it. Grab your Type on a Path tool, same thing, and then you can change the font to whatever it is that you want. This text warp will work better with a bolder, thicker font because you'll see more, I don't know, you'll see more of a difference in the design that you'll see more of a difference in the effect that we're applying to it if it's a little bit more thicker and bolder. So what I did was I went and I changed all the lettering to all caps by going to Type, Change Case, and then I selected uppercase. And that also kind of widens my lettering. And so this is going to be in terms of the portrait that we do. I'm going to select this and go to, I selected Bodoni, bold, all caps. Then with the text selected, I'm going to go to, I believe it's Object, Envelope Distort, Make with Mesh. Okay, and then this will allow you to preview what you're doing. So I'm going to do 6 rows, 9 columns so that I can have more effect between the letters. And you'll see this kind of weird column grid around my letters, but each one of these blue little dots are anchor points. And I can manipulate these anchor points, and I'll zoom in so you can see a little bit better. I can manipulate these anchor points with my direct selection tool. Just simply by clicking on any one of them, now lets me alter the angle of the letters, which gives a really cool effect. You might have seen some typographic designs done. This allows me to kind of make things small. It's a really neat way to create some dimension between your letters, and also allows you to trace really easily. So just by simply adjusting one of the mesh anchor points, it will give you a really cool effect. And this will come in handy with your Illustrator portrait too. You can bring them in. Okay, so then if you take a step back, it gives it a whole new look, and this will make for a really cool design when you start applying it to your portrait. Are there any questions on how that was achieved? I'll do it one more time for you on this block down here. Once you've typed in your text and you've got your Type on a Path, you can go to Object, the drop-down menu, Envelope Distort, Make with Mesh. And then you'll have rows, I like 6 by 9 because it allows you to make more intimate changes to the lettering. You can also preview it to make sure it's what you want. You hit OK. Then you'll grab your direct selection tool, and this will allow you to click on any one of the blue anchor points. Now you do want to be careful that you can still distinguish what it's reading at, but it's a really neat way to create some, you can go at an angle. And I can't tell you how many typographic portraits are done like this, how many typographic articles have been designed. This is just a really cool styling trick in general. Now this is a really messy version, but I just wanted to show you, you can do all sorts of different kinds of things. So I'll give you about 3 minutes to try to apply a gradient mesh to your Type on a Path text, and let me know when you've got that, Terry. I'll have you share your screen. Are there any questions with how to achieve this look or to get this setting? Is it pretty self-explanatory? Okay. All right, so we'll put about 2 minutes on the clock. Okay, how's it coming? Feeling pretty confident with it? All right, and Terry, would you like to share? Awesome. Okay, go ahead and share your screen. Perfect. And then can you show me how you went to object? Okay, I already see you've got that. So yeah, object, envelope distort, and make with mesh. Oh, I guess it doesn't let you. You have to select it first. There you go. And I see you've already got it on there, so that's perfect. Yep, reset with mesh. And then try 6x9 on the grid. That might allow you, give you a little bit more control over the letter distortion. There you go. And now if you grab your direct selection tool, you can grab any one of those little blue anchor points that are close to your lettering, and it will kind of allow you to, there you go. Yeah, there you go. And that gives you a little bit more control over the distortion of the letters. So play around with that a little bit, and this will be a fun exercise that we can apply to our portrait illustrator or illustration. Perfect job. Great job, Terry. Thank you for sharing. All right, let's jump back to the PowerPoints real quick. So we talked about envelope distort. We talked about text wrap, text on a path. Let's see what else. I think we're good on this. I have some YouTube videos that I think would be really helpful for you guys. I think I'll post that in the announcements. One is how to set up grids in InDesign, and one is how to set up your baseline grid. And I think we're gonna wanna jump into that probably right now. So let's go, let's look at the YouTube video. I will show one of them because it's a short one. And then we'll jump into InDesign. Actually, I'll just explain it. If you can pull up your InDesign for me, we're going to shift gears here real quick because this is going to be really important on how to lay out our article. So launch InDesign, and while you're doing that, I'm going to go over the last few slides. We're going to talk about designer responsibility. So what can happen if you don't pay attention to detail? This is probably why all your instructors and teachers kind of emphasize paying attention to detail. It can get a little scary if you don't. So let's look at these examples of what not to do. Can you tell me what you notice? What did this designer fail to do? What jumps out at you? Probably the spell check, right? The word public schools was misspelled, and so it gives on a whole new meaning. Yes, so you definitely want to make sure you are spell checking. If not, read your headlines very clearly and make sure that you have spelled them correctly. What a terribly public mistake. Let's look at this one. Packed with tasteless sugar. There's just no punctuation, so it just kind of runs all together and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So we want to be mindful of punctuation. It's missing a comma. It's also missing a period. What about this one? You've got Mrs. Whitland emphasizing spacing and leading and tracking and alignment, yeah, and kerning. Kids exchange. This one really needs to have that space, that spacing there. Otherwise, it gives on a whole new meaning. So again, we need to just pay attention to the spacing of our words. Let's look at this. I don't know if there's any Harry Potter fans in the house, but here is a collection of all of the Harry Potter DVDs. If you'll look closely, what is something that you see? What's something that stands out to you? It would be the consistency of the layout, right? Look at the pictures. They don't even line up. Look at the titles of the movies. They don't line up. Look at the word DVD video and the logo, the WB logo. They don't even line up. So it appears that there's no consistency going on here, which is kind of strange considering how this was such a big movie, and hopefully the designer would have been on it or used some kind of a template. But in this case, everything is just totally off. And so this is what's going to look, this is a gross error, especially in your article design. You're going to see things when they're side by side. You're going to be working with columns and baseline grids. This is going to be something that will stand out to you with things that are misaligned. And so we really want to make sure we've got an eye for alignment. What about this one? Again, it looks like someone hit spell check but didn't catch the actual error. First floor, second floor, third floor. I think they just completely missed the ball on this one. It's incorrect, whoops, from the very beginning. So we need to just pay attention. Sometimes spell check doesn't always catch those mistakes because technically it's not misspelled. It's just incorrect, right? Yeah, third floor, that would probably be better. Even the second floor, the first floor should have all been written correctly and they weren't. Okay, and again, there's no logic to this one. It just is kind of random. Usually if you're going to run text vertically, it's usually because you're filling out an acronym, but this is just kind of all over the place. So it doesn't really follow a grid system at all. Okay, what about this one? Orange County Wear Magazine. They put their model in a very interesting place. What do you notice? Yeah, the placement. It makes the word read a little differently, which is a shame too. So again, we want to make sure we're not stacking text on top of text and we're giving breathing room and we're paying attention where we're placing our elements, especially in our layout and design. Here's another example of a good idea gone wrong. Someone was trying to create the word grapefruit by using a piece of grapefruit. However, leaving off that crucial first letter really makes the article read a little differently. So we want to be mindful. Sometimes our creative ideas don't always translate once we put them in our design. So we want to make sure that we're aware of what we're doing. All right, let's talk about our typographic illustration. So these are our text illustrations. Here are some examples of what students have done before. I've seen some very simple illustrations and I've seen some very complex illustrations. These are kind of in the middle. And again, you can get as complex as something like this, which is really, really cool. Or you can, obviously this is not a portrait, but styles and sizes really create texture and value. So this is an example of using bold and regular font, being able to create something that gives dimension and shading. So this is really cool effect that you can use by just using different font weights for your same font family. Now you're going to be using the font that you chose to write about in your research paper from last week, and you're going to be using that same font. So for example, if you chose to write on Helvetica or Dido, you will want to take that font and you want to create a portrait out of it. It can be a portrait of you. It can be anything you want. It just has to be a face. You don't have to worry about arms and legs and a body. This is just a portrait. So head to neck is sufficient, okay? And again, you can be as complex or as simple as you want. I do highly encourage you to take the demos that we did today on text warping and typing on a path. You know, hopefully you take them and apply them to these designs, because I think it'll really give your illustration a really cool look, and it's really neat to practice. So here's just some examples. So by using different font weights in the font family, you can create some shading and really cool effects. And you can get super complex like the example on the right, and simply it's just a jumble of letters rotated and copied and pasted on top of each other. And I really want you to have fun with this this assignment, because it's a chance to get creative and use your imagination a little bit. Now, to get the effect on the left, this is an unrealistic effect in Illustrator. We're not able to get this kind of effect unless you take it into Photoshop, and believe me, there are some really cool typographic illustrations you can do in Photoshop, and some really cool stuff you can do with text in Photoshop. But since this is a Illustrator assignment, I'm going to show you how to do it simply, which is good for you because there's only going to be one or two ways that you can approach it, and there'll be simple ways, so something you can feel comfortable with. All right, so I think that concludes our slides. We can jump into the design portion. Do you have any questions, Terry? Anything about the assignments or anything that we've covered? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to close out of this. It looks like we're going to go ahead and take our 10-minute break, and when we come back, go ahead and have InDesign launched and Illustrator launched. And I'm going to show you a way to do your Illustrator, and also how to set up your document for your layout. Okay, so we'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, so we are back. Let's talk about our article layout for assessment 3. So you're supposed to take the article that you wrote on your font that you chose from last week. So whether it was on Helvetica or Times New Roman, whatever it was, that's the article that you're gonna do a design and layout. So let me show you how to set it up real quick. First things first, we want to set up our document. So go to File, New, select Document. And we haven't really worked in InDesign much other than now, unless you've been doing some assignments in InDesign. But this new document dialog box comes up. You're going to want to check mark facing pages. And what this does is it allows pages to sit side by side. And we want this because we're going to be doing a layout on a 2-page spread. So we're going to select facing pages. The number of pages you want to be 3. Why do you want 3? Well, because the first page will be separate from the other 2, and the 2 will sit side by side. So we want 3, and I'll show you how to kind of get around that in just a minute. It's 8.5 by 11 is the orientation, and I want it to be vertical. I like a 3-column grid. I think it's pretty standard. You can increase your grid sizes or your column sizes. The more columns you have, the less text you need to fill space. So if your article's on the shorter side, then you can kind of up your grids. And as you see me change it, it changes on the screen. But the narrower they become, the harder it is to read and create a really good alignment. So maybe four columns would be a good start. And then your gutter, you want it to be about 1 pica, a 1 pica difference between your columns. That's just that white space between it. And as we use our columns as guides, you really want to make sure that that gutter is set to a good spacing. So here's this one. Margins, you can kind of keep it at 3 picas all the way around. That's a pretty standard one. And we don't need to worry about bleed and slug right now. You'll hit OK. And this is a good starting point. So as we scroll down, you'll see here's our double truck or our 2-page spread. Close out of here. All right, so as I zoom out, you can see why we needed the 3 pages, because one is usually the cover and then the inside pages. And this is what we want. Okay, so when we're doing this, it's important for you to kind of figure out a layout that you're going to be working with. I use Google a lot for inspiration, just kind of see what we could mimic or come up with. And I found a few examples and I wanted to show you. This has all the elements that we would need for a good layout and design. It has a headline up top, like a header. It has a pull quote, a fruit that is loaded with skin protective antioxidants. It has a 3-column grid, which is really awesome. And then at the bottom, it has a footer. It also has some artwork. We're not allowed to use artwork, but we don't need to because we're going to need to include the entire alphabet of our font, like all the characters of our font, A through Z, and then 1 through 9, or 0 through 9. And then it has a good strong headline. So these are all the elements that we'll need for our design. There's this one. There's also one that I found that I thought was kind of cool concept here to kind of start us off. Whoops. Hang on. Move this over here. So this is a neat concept because it has A through Z, the lowercase, uppercase, and then 1 through 10 right here. And then the title of the article would be kind of a cool concept. So I think this is the one I'm going to go with. And what I'm going to do is, this kind of takes us off the grid a little bit, but I like the look of it. So let's execute it. If we simply, let's set up our document first. Few things that you want to know is you want to make sure, if you go under View, you want to make sure under Grids and Guides that your Lock Column Guides is on, Snap to Guides is on, and Smart Guides is on, okay? You also want to see Show Baseline Grid. You actually want to see all of these. So you want to make sure those are all turned on, okay? To flow your article into InDesign, you'll grab your text, your type tool, and you just kind of, you can draw a box and flow it in, or you can go to File, Place, and then I titled mine Helvetica. And I will see, you can see the lettering in my mouse. It just says, here's an article, where do you want it? And I'm gonna click once and it already snaps, because I have the grids and the guides on and the smart guides, and they snap into place. All I have to do is click once and it will automatically format that column of text to my column. It's a beautiful thing. It eliminates all the work that you usually have to do. There you go. And again, I'll grab this little box at the bottom. If you see here, this plus sign down here, let me zoom in so you can see it. Okay, right here. Do you see that red plus sign? That anchor point is red. It isn't usually red. What that means is there's more text in there that you haven't yet formatted, or that you can't see. So by clicking the plus sign, it gives me that extra text, and all I have to do is click once and it will hang my logo, or my the rest of my text. Okay, so now all I have to do is highlight all of the text boxes, and I can just bring them down until they end at the same point there. Okay, this is my headline, so we'll probably get into that in just a minute. But now what I want to do is show you how to create a baseline grid. And this is very important because the lines of text need to line up correctly. They also need to end in the same place. How do we do that? Well, we're going to go to InDesign at the top, our preferences. Okay. Or you can hit Command K. Command K will bring up your preferences box on your keyboard if you don't know where to go. Click on grids, and then you can choose the baseline grid color, something that appeals to you. If you want something less intrusive than a light blue, I'm going to keep it light blue just so that you can see it. Start about 3 picas is about generally where my margin line is. So that's probably a good starting point, and I want it to say relative to the top of the page, meaning you can start the baseline grid 3 picas down from the top of the page. Increment every. Okay, this one is important. This point size is determined based on the font size and on the leading of your font. So if you look closely, I'll cancel this real quick. If you look closely, you can determine what it is simply by going to your character formatting controls, and you can see here clearly that it says 12-point leading. So this is perfect. It's a 10-point font. I'm in Helvetica. So now I can go back to my grid, Command K. I can go to my grid preferences, and my increment every is 12 points. So I just want this to match my leading, meaning the baseline of each line of text will match what my leading is. Does that make sense? And then there's a view threshold. If you're having trouble seeing your baselines, it's probably because you want it to be lower than the viewpoint that you're at. So for instance, if you look at my untitled document here, it says it's at a 75% view, meaning it's zoomed out to 75%. I'm just going to set this to 40, so I'll be safe. Anything under what you already are at will allow you to view it, and then you'll hit OK. Now, you don't see any difference in the document. It probably means that we need to show our baseline grid. So go to View, scroll down, Show Baseline Grid. There we go. All right, so everything lines up really, really well. We've got these blue lines that show us where we are. And also, we want to go to, let's see, Command K. Go back to grids. You want to deselect grids in back, because then you won't be able to see where your lines are lining up. So make sure that's unchecked. We don't want that box checked. Okay, there we go. All right, so now it seems as though we've got everything here. Now, if we zoom in, you'll notice some of the words in my middle column are going over my baseline, okay? And that's not what I want. So they're not really lining up. How do we fix that? Well, the whole thing, if you hit Command A, Command A will highlight all of your text, and then you want the font to be the exact same size and font. So Helvetica, oops, we don't want to condense, hold on. Helvetica regular, okay. And then I want my font size to be 10 and my leading to be 12, okay. There we go. So I'll zoom out again. And still it's not lining up, so let's try something else that we can do. Whoops, sorry, I pushed something I shouldn't have. Oops. All right, let me close out of this. Never mind. Okay, so now if we look under our paragraph formatting controls, if you look over here towards the middle, you really want to make sure the balance columns is selected, okay? So we'll select our columns and click balance columns. All right, and then I'm going to go back to our paragraph controls here. Oops. Go back to hang on one second. It is thinking. There we go. All right. And then, let's see. So now we've got this. Now we can just kind of move them up. We want to make sure it says balance columns. It still doesn't look even. So we're going to need to do one more thing. Okay, one second. Hang on, my bar is messing up. Okay, so now we've got that. We really want to make sure everything's even. So this will allow us to kind of go in and alter the lines of text. What we want to do is make sure that our text is lining up on the baseline of our grid, okay? At the same point. All right, are there any questions so far about where we're at? How did I get somewhere? Does this make sense on how to create your baseline grid? Go ahead and take a minute to try it because I really want you to get used to it. And Terry, do you have any questions, or is this pretty simple? All right, good. Okay, so with that said, we want to make sure that it's all lined up on your baseline grid, that the words are lining up at the same point. And once that's turned on, we can start beginning our design. So it's just a matter of creating layers. So what we'll do is open up our layers. Let's go to Window, Layers. Our layers box will show up, and I will create two layers. One is going to be my text layer, and they're color coded so that you'll see, and one is going to be my background layer. Now on my background layer, this is where you can place an image that you want to copy, and you can kind of set the opacity really low so you can kind of line up your headline and see where you want to place everything. There's that. And in this case, I'm just going to create this Helvetica layout because I think it's really cool. So I'll just start going off and kind of designing. And I want this to be big. And I'm going to grab my line tool to create this effect that's coming off the page. By increasing my stroke weight, it will give me the extended L that I'm looking for. Okay, and I want this to kind of go off the page. And this is going to be my text, so I need to make sure it's on the right layer. Okay, and then all of these text boxes can get moved down. There we go. This one I'm going to change to a regular. I'm going to rotate it. And I don't want to go over my baseline grid, or sorry, my gutter here. There we go. And then I'll take this line and just rotate it. That'll be the continuation of the letter I. And it can go across this page even. All right, and then that kind of gives me my base. By hitting W, it allows you to kind of see your clean lines, where you're at. And then this will allow me to kind of type let's see, 1, 2. Helvetica. I'll choose a regular, and then this will allow me to rotate it. So I can kind of gauge what kind of spacing I need. There we go. And I might need, you can adjust your tracking if you need to kind of spread things out a little bit. Turn on your rulers and guides so that you can make sure that the baseline of the V and the numbers all line up. There we go. And then you can kind of do the rest of your characters. The So you kind of get the idea with the design. There you go. So this kind of is the artwork, I guess you could say, for the layout. I'm going to put a little space here between the R so that when the fold of the page folds, it doesn't cut it off. And then at the bottom here, you can put the lowercase letters. I just copied it, and then you can go to type, change case, and go to lowercase. And so now they do the lowercase ones, okay? And this just needs to be spread out a little bit. Perfect. Okay, so we've got our lowercase, our uppercase. We've got our numbers, and now we need to focus on the structure of our article. And I can go ahead and get rid of this little design that I'm mimicking here. And we're gonna need, let's see what else. You can do pull quotes. You can have all your text boxes go across the page. We've got that 4-column grid. It helps to design in your columns. So you want all of your columns to line up. You want them to end at the same line. So the margin, pink margin line is a good place to kind of have them line up here. Okay, and then again, you want to make sure, if you're hurting for content, you can always pull more content from the internet to, you know, complete your article. But I really want you to focus on where you're going to put your pull quote and how are you going to create some artwork within. You can also do something which is called a drop cap, which allows you to increase the size of your capital, the first letter right here. If you increase the size, you only need to do about 4 points or less. You don't need to do much more than that. Usually the drop cap is a different color, so that might be a really cool place to start. Adding a pop of color, black and red are classic color combinations. You do a drop cap. You can either choose to give a break in the paragraph, or you can choose to do, oops, you can choose to indent the lines. Whoops, that's not how you indent. Okay, but it's kind of either or. And let's see what else. Do you have any questions, Terry? Any other questions that come to mind? All right, one last thing I wanted to show you that I forgot to address. If you'll notice, as you're moving around text boxes, they may be lined up so that they line up the same line. I'm gonna make sure all these line up at the same point. They're all gonna line up the same baseline. But they don't always line up as far as going across the same baseline. They're not lining up at the bottom very well. So if you highlight your text, Apple A, highlight it, and then click on your paragraph control settings here, the top, and then click on this icon here. This will automatically format your text. So no matter how you move it around, it'll always snap into position. Okay? So always want to make sure we align to our baseline grid. Do you see that icon there? Terry, do you see that? Okay. All right, so now everything is lining up as it should on the same line. Everything looks good. Okay, you could even put some subheaders in there. You can kind of make things stand apart. But I really want you to try to create a really good article. You could even put a pull quote up here. This is for a double check if you really wanted to lay it out that way. If you wanted to just do a one-page layout, then that's fine too. You can kind of follow the structure of this example here. And simply put, you could put little header at the top. But I want you to just find a layout online that you really like and kind of structure it accordingly, okay? Try to copy it. In this case, that's okay because I really want you to get used to the elements that you have to include, okay? That's all the time we have for aligning our baseline grid and setting up our grid in our document. But what I did want to show you was the portrait or the illustration. So let's shift gears here and go to Illustrator. Let's switch. Let me stop my screen share and switch to Illustrator here. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to do a really fun assignment, and I'm excited to demo this one today. You want to set up your document to be an 8.5 by 11. So if you go to the top of your screen and go to File, New, and we'll do some thinking. And then I just want to select 8.5 by 11, hit Create. Oh, I created too many artboards. Whoops. Okay. Well, we'll just do one. You can always get rid of them. Let's see. Sorry about that. I didn't see it was set to 8. Okay. Artboards are great, but we don't need that many. Okay, now I've got my 8.5 by 11. I went online and found a Vin Diesel picture that I can copy to copy my design. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Window, Layers, make sure my Layers panel is opened. Here it is. And I want 2 layers. One is going to be my Vin Diesel. That's going to be my background. And the other layer is going to be my type. So on my background layer, I've got my picture. I'm going to resize it to the page, kind of where I want it to be. All right, just like that. So I've got him placed. Now remember how we did a clipping mask? If the photo is too large, you can just draw a rectangle, take off the stroke, take off the fill, right click, arrange, bring to front, and then select all of the elements. Right click, make clipping mask. Okay, so now he's all set and you can move him around later. I'm gonna increase him. Right now, you can either change the opacity to be something lower so you can, you know, see your type more, but in this case, it doesn't matter. Now I'm gonna go to my type layer. I'm gonna make sure I'm on the red layer here. And I'm going to get my pen tool. And this is where I'm gonna kind of trace his forehead a little bit. And once I have that, I'm gonna go to my type on a path tool. So same concept that we were practicing earlier. And again, I'm going to go to the Bedoni font that I was using earlier. I want to set it to bold, and I'm going to go to type, change case to uppercase. Now in this case, I can create phrases. I don't have to use the font, so I can see. It's more fun if you have a phrase. Okay, and then I'm going to increase my font here. Perfect. So now I've got my forehead line tracing, and then I'm going to go to, remember how we did the text warp? I'm going to go to Object, Envelope Distort, Make with Mesh. I like 6 by 9. I recommend 6 by 9 on 6 rows and 9 columns, and then hit OK. And this will give me a really cool effect. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, and this is where I'm going to start grabbing each of the letters. I want to kind of get that F to the edge of the page. I'm going to kind of be shaping the brow a little bit. Okay. All right. I've got that. And now I'm going to grab my pen tool again. And I'm going to just kind of trace. Trace my lines. Go back to my type on a path. And then again, I can have more words, but in this case, for sake of time, I'm just gonna do this now. Gonna kind of get it where you want it. You can either increase the font size, make it smaller, whatever you want, but the more adjustments or font differences, kind of the better. It looks nice. Okay, so go to Object, Envelope Distort, Make with Mesh, same settings, hit OK. And I'm just going to get this L to kind of wrap around the edge. And I really want these letters to kind of blend into each other. You might need to zoom in quite a bit to see what I'm doing, but the idea here is to try to get it to follow the same path as the other one. And if they run into each other, that's okay. In this case, that's okay. You kind of see where I'm going with this. And it's kind of a tedious process, but it's really fun to see the outcome. Okay. There we go. And you'll just keep doing that over and over again. If you want to, here's how I do I'll just start at the bottom. And I'll just start kind of with the brow. Okay, and then I'll grab my type tool. Oops, type on a path tool. That's why it didn't work. I want to change the case to uppercase. Okay, and in this case, I'm going to start small, go to about 10 point. I'm going to increase by 2 for each one. So 10, 12, 14. Do 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. You kind of get the idea. 28. And then I'll work my way back. 26, 24, 22. And the reason why I'm doing this is to kind of create a little bit of dimension. And even with my mesh combined, it'll be a really cool effect. 16, 14, 12, 10. All right. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to grab this word. I'm going to go to Envelope Distort, Make with Mesh, hit OK. And again, I'm going to go and tweak it. So I'm going to grab my mesh points and just try to get it as close to the edge of the page as possible. I'm trying to trace his face. Here we go. So with the size difference, this is now allowing me to kind of go in and create a little bit of angle, and there we go. All right, so let's take a look at that. So there we go. And then next, my aim of the game is to kind of create, again, I'm just going to be tracing this as best as I can. You don't really need to worry about the arches so much. Go in, turn off my fill, grab my type on a path tool. I'm going to bring to front. There we go. Object, change case to uppercase. And go to object, envelope, distort, make with mesh. So as you can see, it's a process that you kind of are going to be doing over and over, but that has some really cool effects. Let's see. The idea is to kind of fill that gap there, but if you can't do it without losing the readability of the letters, I recommend not doing it. It's kind of drawing another line on top. There we go. You do want the letters touching, but you don't want them overlapping. So just do your best to kind of see, how close you can get. If you have to zoom in, by all means. All right, let's see where we're at with that. So that wasn't probably the best job, but just keep filling it in and filling it in. Let's see if we can do his last part. Type on a path. And what I want to do is kind of do the same thing where I kind of decreased the size. 12 point, 14 point. I'm trying to fill this gap, so I want it to look like this was on purpose. Oop. Are there any questions before we end on how to get these looks, this effect? Do we feel pretty comfortable with it? Okay, so let's do this one more time. Object, envelope to sort, mesh, hit OK. Now I'm gonna have to zoom in for this one. It's gonna get a little tricky, but I'm gonna try to grab the point of the L and have it fill in the blanks. Might need to move this up just for a minute. There we go. Now I can get in there. It wouldn't let me do it. There we go. All right, so I'm just kind of trying to fill in the gaps a little bit. Zoom out. You kind of see it already kind of taking place here. You can do the same for the eyes. You can even do, let's see, type vertical path type. You can type in some words there and change the case. That's also a way to do it. Or you can draw the shape of the nose. There we go. Take off the fill. I always forget to do that. And then kind of adjust it where you need. And then you can do the type on a path tool as well. It kind of fills it in there. Adjust your font size. So you can kind of see, start tracing the contours of the face, start outlining areas that you want to highlight. And hopefully this is a fun project for you. This is a more complex part of the project. You can do a lot simpler designs, but in this case, this is how the pros do it. So I wanted to show you this cool effect. Let's go to Object, Envelope to Sort. For the smaller text, you can get away with not using as many meshes. This allows me to kind of adjust the angle of his nose a little bit. So I can get the right shape. There we go. So I got the shape of his nose done pretty well. Same with his eyes and his eyebrows. Take off the fill. Grab the Type on a Path tool. And for the smaller areas, don't be afraid to go small with the text. There we go. And just keep doing that same mesh over and over. Zoom in so you can see what you're doing. And just use it to kind of follow the shape of his eyebrow. Anyways, this could go on forever, but I did want to at least allow you to see how you can achieve this look without having to use Photoshop. Like that. And you can even make it so that the text runs into this nose a little bit. That could be kind of cool effect. Kind of bring it in there. So now it's one straight seamless line of text. So keep playing around with it. Use different font sizes. You can use different font weights. You can even use, just the weights and the font sizes alone with the text warp will really give you a cool effect in this case. And we could keep going until his whole head is filled, trace the ears, but we're all out of time right now. So are there any questions before we end this lecture? Okay. All right. And then in the end, you would just take off, you would just take off the background and you would submit just the portrait. Okay. You wouldn't have the picture. Oops. Let's go to the type layer. There we go. All right, so then you would just hide the picture and it would be whatever was left. So, all right. Well, we'll go ahead and end here. If you have any questions, please come to the multi-session on Thursday, same time, 7:30 to 9:30 Mountain Standard Time. If you are unable to meet with me, please make sure you visit an instructor. Their schedules are posted on the announcements on our course homepage. Also, please don't be afraid to visit the Student Success Center if you have any questions. They're available throughout the week and over the weekend too. So if you can't reach me on Thursday, they're a great option. Oh, I'm sorry, on Wednesday. Thank you. I'm off on my days. So come on Wednesday for our multi-session. And that should conclude our lecture. Thank you for coming. Thank you for visiting, Terry. I appreciate your participation. And then thank you all those who are watching at home. Shoot me an email if you have any questions, and we'll see you guys next week.